we'll have that recording available. Let's go ahead and share my PowerPoint. All right. Can everybody see that? Nod if you can see it. You can see my PowerPoint? Okay, perfect. Okay, great. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be talking about, I've kind of done cybersecurity on multiple incidences, and gosh, I could talk about all the different types of cybersecurity for hours, to be honest with you, because there's so many different things out there. But today we're going to be talking about the real cost of an ACH scam. And the reason I really want to talk about this is because we have seen an explosion in ACH scams this past year. And the cyber criminals have just gotten really, really tricky. And so that's why I wanted to kind of do a 30-minute, mini webinar just on this alone, because, I get a lot of folks that I talk to that say, well, I don't have anything that cyber criminals want. Especially I'm talking to like roofing companies, and I'm talking to, contractors, and people that are just like, I have no data, and they'll say, and if they steal all of my data, well, I don't really care. It's not important to me. But this ACH scam and variations of the ACH scams is what we're seeing as a real issue, and does definitely affect these type of companies. And so so just a couple of kind of statistics that I wanted to kind of break out here for you is, because of AI, and again, we're going to be talking about AI next month, but because of AI, cyber criminals have gotten much better at their jobs, and they've gotten much faster at their jobs as well. Okay. So we just got some new numbers from CrowdStrike. So the 2025 numbers just came out, and it's showing that that there's a 65% decrease year over year from the amount of time that it takes for a cyber criminal to, once they get inside your network, to go lateral to all the other computers. Okay. And so the average time right now is 29 minutes. So once a cyber criminal gets into one particular computer, on average, it takes just 29 minutes to start moving across the entire network. The fastest recorded time was just 27 seconds. Okay. And so that's why it's so important that we do our best to lock down all of our computers. I have a lot of customers that come to me and they say, well, we use, these 6 or 7 computers over here on a regular basis, but I've got this one computer over here that we just use periodically. It's just for blah, blah, blah. We don't really have to protect it, do we? And my answer is always, you need to protect everything in your network, because you're only as strong as the weakest link. And so if a cyber criminal gets into that one computer that we're not protecting, or we're not protecting as well as all the other systems, this shows right here that within 27 seconds to 29 minutes, they're going to be all over the rest of your computers. And so that's why the breakout time is important. The other thing that's important in the statistics that I think is really interesting is that 82% of all successful cyber attacks right now are malware free. What does that mean? Well, malware free means that they didn't do any kind of special tool to get into your computer. In other words, they didn't overwhelm the memory with a memory override, or steal a token, or anything like that. What they did was they figured out what your password was, or they did some sort of a tool to guess your password in order to get into your email account. Or this actually just came up earlier this week. We had a customer that we're working with right now that's got a QuickBooks problem, and we were not able to solve it, so we had to open a ticket with QuickBooks. And QuickBooks is having a difficult time solving it. In fact, I think the ticket is still open now, to be honest with you. I don't know what's going on with them. But anyway, the ticket had been open for, a good 48 hours or so. And we got a call from our customer saying, hey, I've got QuickBooks on the phone right now. They want to remote in right this instant. And we were like, well, that's kind of weird, because we have a ticket open with them, and they haven't responded on the ticket saying that they're going to be, wanting to remote in or anything like that. And so we got on the phone with them and, started talking with them, and, sounded like a QuickBooks person and everything, but they wanted us to install their remote software. And we're like, no, I don't think so. And we said, well, I'll tell you what, if you want us to use this remote software, then I need you to put a link in the ticket for QuickBooks so that we can see that link, and then we'll copy it from there and install it. And then we never heard back from them after that. And we quickly realized that this was a cyber criminal that was just randomly calling businesses saying, hey, we noticed that you had a QuickBooks problem. We'd like to remote in and take care of it for you. So that's a perfect example right there, where we talk about 82% of the malware-free attacks that are out there right now. It's just using trickery to get people to log into to allow them to get logged into their systems, and people are just letting them in because they think that they're supposed to be. So this is why you have to kind of stay on a heightened security. So again, this is not a ransomware story. This is not something where ACH fraud makes the news, because it doesn't. It's not sexy. It's not, the Colonial Pipeline thing where there was a $5 million ransom on it or anything like that. This is cyber criminals tricking everyday companies into giving them, $15,000, $20,000, $35,000 in ACH, checks and that kind of thing. So that's what we're talking about here today. So, Wendy and I were kind of talking about this just prior to us starting the webinar, and the question is how are cyber criminals getting in and doing this? The vast majority of the time, it's because of poor passwords. And that's why it's so important to use a password manager right now. So there's a lot of different ways that cyber criminals get into your environment, or they figure out what the password is for your environment. And, it could be that, you have reused a password that's been breached. We have a lot of people that have like a favorite password that they like to use. Or they may even kind of change that password up a little bit and put an exclamation point or a number 1 on it or something like that. The problem is cyber criminals know that. And so, they kind of do credential stuffing. Once they decide that they want to target your business, and that's what a lot of cyber criminals are doing right now, by the way, is they're targeting your businesses. They're going on LinkedIn and they're figuring out, well, who is the person in charge of accounting? Who gets access, to sending out invoices? Who gets access to customers? Okay. And so they target that person. And then once they know who that person is, they want to get into that person's email account. And so they try and figure out what the password is, and again, they're buying stuff on the dark web, because, if your password has been compromised by another company, in fact, there was, I listened to K-Love, and just a few weeks ago on K-Love, there was a couple of the DJs that were talking about how he has a grill from a grill company, and he got notifications that his username and password had been stolen from this grill company. And, so through no fault of his own, because the grill company got compromised, his password is now being bought and sold on the dark web. So that's how cyber criminals are targeting specific companies, figuring out who the accounting person is, and then trying to figure out what the email might be in order to get into that particular email of the accounting person. You can stop a lot of this by making sure that multi-factor authentication is not only turned on, but it's enforced. So I see a lot of companies that will turn on multi-factor authentication, but they won't enforce it. And what happens is if you don't enforce it as a domain, then my wife is like really guilty of this, by the way. She gets very frustrated with multi-factor authentication, as we all do. It's very frustrating. I get it. But the problem is without multi-factor authentication, then all a cyber criminal has to have is just your password and they're in, okay? But the problem is if you don't enforce the use of two-factor authentication across your entire domain, then a user could literally just go in and turn it off for them. And so if they go in and turn it off for them, then that completely defeats the purpose. You may think as an administrator that, you know, two-factor is turned on throughout the environment because you turned it on 2 months ago, but what you didn't know is that so-and-so turned it off, you know, 2 weeks ago, and now they've been compromised because of that. So that's a big thing is that, you know, highly recommend you use a password manager and make sure that you use two-factor authentication, and that will definitely help keep hackers out from getting into the email to start with. So this is something I kind of wanted to talk about as well, and that is we take care of, we probably, for about half of our customers, we take care of their email. In other words, we take care of the domain, we're taking care of the security and all that kind of thing. And one of the things that we have on there is some pretty enterprise level, heavy duty spam filters and that kind of thing. And what I hear a lot of, and we've seen a huge increase on that and this in just the last 45 days or so, we're getting a lot of customers that are calling us up and going, hey, I don't know why you all are quarantining this. This is from someone I know. I know for a fact that he was supposed to send me something. And we'll take a look at it and be like, well, this has definitely got a payload. Okay, so a payload is basically, you know, either a link or a document or a picture or something like that. And when you download it to your computer, then it starts creating havoc. You know, it's either going to it's either going to have a keylogger associated with it so that it can steal your password that way, or it's going to if your system is not patched properly, it's going to you know, set up a situation where you know, the cyber criminal is able to bypass your security completely because it's got a payload that hits the Microsoft software directly. And so I guess what I'm wanting to warn you on is that, you know, just because you know the person, you cannot trust it, because we have so many people right now, people that you're doing business with, that think that their computers are secure, and they're really not. And what's happening is that, you know, the cyber criminals are sending out mass emails from these people's computers, and they don't even know it. And so I just highly recommend two things. First of all, if you have an IT company and they say, hey, this email's been quarantined, before you tell them to just release it, I want you to kind of take into effect that, you know, what we're seeing is that 45% of the time that email really is, you know, has an issue with it. And it should be quarantined for good reason. But, you know, the other reason is that you may have friends and family that are attacked, and they have no idea, because a lot of times cyber criminals will just use those people in order to get the people that they know you know. And again, they do this through LinkedIn and Facebook. So if they're targeting your accounting person, they're going to get on LinkedIn and Facebook, and they're going to see who those people are friends with. And then they're going to see, okay, well, I should be able to easily be able to infiltrate this person's mother or father or, you know, whatever. And then once I have that, I can send, you know, this fake email that has a payload to it, you know, to the accounting email address, and this person will open it because they think it's a good email address. So again, these are all things that are happening, and, you know, all the time. Okay, so what happens? What happens with a true ACH scam? Okay. So once a cyber criminal gets into the accounting, so let's call it a roofing company, for example, okay, because we've actually worked with quite a few different companies over the past 12 months, and one of them really was a roofing company. And what happens is the cyber criminal gets into the computer, and they just sit there. There's no fanfare. There's no red sirens or whistles or anything like that. What the cyber criminal is doing is they're just checking to see how you do business. Okay. They're taking a look at who your customers are, and what they want is they want commercials. They love business to business customers. Absolutely love them, because business to business customers are usually doing ACH transactions on a regular basis, and we usually don't question each other. Okay. Because most businesses that are doing business with businesses trust each other. And so In this particular situation with this roofing company, it was a commercial roofer, and the cyber criminal got in. They spent a couple of weeks just checking out who they do business with, how they collect money, how they invoice their customers, all of this kind of stuff. And then at some point, once they know how this works, and a lot of companies kind of invoice on a monthly basis, whether you invoice on the first of the month, the middle of the month, or the end of the month, whatever it is, the cyber criminal figures out, okay, so I know that I can recreate their invoice to look just like theirs, and anybody can do that. In fact, you could take a copy of your invoice right now, drop it in the Chat GPT, and say, "Okay, Chat GPT, I need to make another one of these invoices, except that I need you to put in my ACH information, routing number and checking account and so forth. And when you do that, I need you to also put a line in there that says, hey, we have changed financial institutions. Please remit your payments to this new routing number and so forth." And ChatGPT will do that for you. Okay. And then once they have that new document, they take a look and see who you would normally bill out on a regular basis. Sorry, I had to get a drink of water there. And then again, they're going to identify when you would normally send those out. And what they do is they'll create a subfolder, and they'll say, okay, any sent email has to go to the sent folder, and it needs to be held there. And again, these are all things that are happening in the background. You're not seeing this. And then what will happen is they will send out their fake invoices to all of your customers. Okay, so fake invoices get sent out to all of your customers. Has the the new checking account and routing information and all that information on there, and then we'll just wait. And then what happens is the ones that you sent, like I said, they go to that folder. The cyber criminal just goes in and just deletes those, and so they never go out at all. So the customer they only get the fake invoice. And then what happens? Well, everything seems perfectly fine. So, we already know the cyber criminal has been in there for a couple of weeks already. And then they take another week or so to recreate your invoice and figure out, who it needs to be sent to. And then they go ahead and do this ACH scam. And then they delete all the ones that you wanted to send. And so, here it is. Let's say it's the first of the month. 10 days goes by and you still don't know that there's any problems, because most people pay on the 15th of the month, usually within a couple months, or maybe it's 30 days, but most companies want to collect in 15 days. And so after 15 days goes by, you start thinking, well, that's kind of odd. Cash flow is a little bit off. We should have gotten some money in by now. But then 20, 25 days later, you still have no money, and you're like, okay, well, we'll send out some reminders. Hey, what's going on? And then all of a sudden you start hearing, what do you mean? We've already paid you. I've got a receipt right here that shows that we paid you. And then you start doing the research on it, and they send you the invoice that they paid, and you look at it and you go, well, I never said anything about changing checking account and routing number and stuff. And lo and behold, it all starts to dawn on you, and you don't know how bad it is until you really start looking into it. But basically at that point, with ACH scams, especially with commercial customers, there's no recourse. Typically within 24 hours, if you're not able to catch it within 24 hours, there's no way to bring it back. And in fact, a lot of times with a lot of banks, it's even a less time than that. So certainly, now that it's been weeks, there's no way to find that money back. Okay, so my question to you is whose fault is that? Is your customer responsible for making sure that that the payment is made to you, or do they have to make a double payment, or whose fault is it? Does anybody have an opinion?
I would think the company would eat it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because this is the problem. So there's two ways that this could go. So the way that this cybercrime used to go is cyber criminals would set up a fake email address. Okay. So, so my email address is thill@cdtechnology.com. And so a cyber criminal would buy a fake domain that looks like cdtechnology.com. So instead of, they'll change out one of the letters, make one letter that's different. And so that it still looks like CD Technology if you're not really looking at it very closely. And so that's how the cyber used to go. And and what would happen is the cyber criminals would just randomly set out emails to people, to everybody really, and just say, hey, here's an invoice for blah blah blah. And of course, you'd look at it and go, I've never done business with this company before. But sometimes the cyber criminal would hit someone and they might get paid for it. In that situation, because the email did not come from the company, it's really the customer's fault. I mean, the customer would just have to go, I'm sorry. In fact, we see this scam a lot in cabin rentals. Here in East Tennessee, we obviously have a lot of cabin rentals, and I've seen a lot of talk about cabin rental companies going, hey, be careful who you're renting your cabin rental from, because they're saying that it's from Bear Tootin', cabin rentals, but it's not. Somebody set up a fake website and fake email and all that kind of stuff. And in that situation, it's not the cabin rental company's fault. It's whoever paid them, because it was all fake. But in this situation, you're absolutely right. It came from your domain. You were the one that was responsible for making sure that the security is in place. And so sadly enough, you're the one that's going to eat those costs. The as far as actual costs go, this is kind of what we kind of see, to be honest with you. And we've been involved in a couple of these, like I said, not our particular customers, but people that we've been trying to help out after the fact because they didn't have an IT department or anything like that. And what we're seeing is the average invoice is about $25,000. And you get like 6 of those invoices, and then all of a sudden you've got like $150,000 stolen. Money that you were counting on to be back in your account to pay employees and pay the mortgage and the rent and all that kind of stuff. And it's not unusual, especially when you're doing business with business-to-business customers. It's not unusual to have, $10, $15, $25,000 invoices with your business clients, depending on what kind of business that you are. Commercial roofing companies for sure, So, that's the first loss that you see is the actual loss. But then, you've got incident losses as well. When you're talking about incident losses, you're talking about, okay, now how do we fix this problem? You're going to have to figure out, well, whose email account got affected? Did everybody's email account get affected? Do we need to completely reset the entire, structure, or is it just one email? If it's a large amount of money, you're going to have to pay somebody to try and see if there's any way to get the ACH money back. Legal counsel, you're going to have to probably, especially if for some reason you decide you're not going to pay this, you're going to have to defend yourself in some way. Again, I don't think there's a way to really defend yourself, but again, legal costs. And then emergency security upgrades, because again, I just said earlier, once they're inside your computer, in just 30 minutes, they're going laterally. Well, where else are they in your network? And so we're not only dealing with that particular one computer, depending on how many computers that you have, we may have to do deep scan forensics on all of them, which is very costly, or we just need to blow them up and start over, one or the other. But the real thing is, when you're looking at this kind of thing, you just need to make sure that you understand that there's a whole lot more costs involved, and it's much more than just stealing the data itself. So there's other operational impacts that happen. So At this point, you can't send out another invoice because you don't know whether it's going to get delivered or not. So, you've already gone 30 days without receiving money. Well, it might take a couple more days to get everything secured down. Your leadership is, paying attention or not paying attention to what they should be paying attention to, which is making money. Instead, they're trying to figure out, how this happened and stop the blood. We've already kind of talked about cash flow problems. The people that are dealing with this, your accounting person should be doing accounting kind of things, but instead, they're having to deal with, talking with customers and, figuring out, which ones did pay the fake invoice and which ones didn't. So, there's just a lot of lost time that goes into this as well. I think probably one of the worst ones, I mean, it's bad enough to lose money, but one of the worst ones is reputation damage. So, you're a business to business customer. These business customers trust you. They trust you. But, at some point, once you go through all of this and the business customer realizes that, someone was in your email account and, they're going to hear that, well, gosh, it wasn't just us that paid this fake ACH. Lots of people did. Your customers are going to start asking a question. And that question is going to be, am I dealing with like really dumb people here, or are they just incompetent? You don't want to be dumb or incompetent in your customer's eyes. Nobody wants to be. But that's the questions that these people are going to be asking if you're not careful. So I know I've gone a little bit long here, so we're kind of wrapping up here in just a minute. But these are the things that you need to make sure that you have in place. Make sure that you have your MFA turned on and enforced. You need to make sure that you have some sort of a payment change verification process. Okay. And this is actually on the customer side. So let's say you're a business to business customer, and let's say you do get an email from your vendor that says, hey, we've changed ACH. That should be spidey senses right there. Don't ever just assume that that's okay. You need to get on the phone and do a voice verification to make sure they really did change, because, I'm just saying, do some due diligence on your part. You may actually be saving them a bundle in the long run just by doing that. Going back to passwords, don't ever share passwords. Don't ever reuse passwords. I've seen lots of companies that have like an info at in a company name or company domain, and they'll have several people checking that email address, and they'll share the password in order to check that email address. Don't ever do that. Set that up as a shared password box, so that everybody has their individual username and passwords to get into it. Excuse me. Again, no email monitoring. Have a good spam filter in place. Employee security training is huge. At least every 12 months, but I think you need to do like some little mini trainings periodically as well. And then again, take a look at your invoice approval process. If you have big ACH amounts, make sure that you have a way to double check and verify with two people or something like that amount should be paid the way that it is. So the cost of prevention versus the incident cost, it only costs $890 per year to put in an enterprise level security on your computer systems to help prevent this, as opposed to the cost of an incident. Like I said, it could be anywhere from $100,000 to $250,000. I haven't dealt with anyone that has lost $250,000, but like I said, the ones that I've dealt with were somewhere in the $100,000 area. So, the question is do you really want to lose that $100,000, or is it worth, $890 per user per year to make sure that you don't have that huge loss? Okay, so like I said, we've kind of gotten to the end of our meeting here. We're going to wrap it up here in just a second. I don't recognize everybody on here, and I know we've got several customers on here, and I appreciate you all tuning in. For those of you that are not customers and you want to talk about your IT, or even if you are a customer and you just have another question about this you want to talk about offline, you don't want to raise your hand right now because you're too shy. You're more than welcome to scan the QR code and set up a time on my calendar if you want to. Hey, Melissa, are you there?
Yes, sir.
So would you put everyone's name in a hat and draw out who is going to be getting the $25 lunch card today? And today's lunch card is a multi-card. It's got Cheesecake Factory, Red Robin, Cracker Barrel, and Red Lobster on it. And it's going to be $25 for lunch. And Melissa, who has earned that today by tuning in?
That would be Miss Wendy.
Miss Wendy, yay. Okay.
I'm going out for lunch. Thank you.
Going out for lunch, yeah. So Melissa will get that gift card to you. We'll actually mail it to you. It's an actual mailed gift card. So anyway, we'll send that to you here just very shortly in the next day or two. Other than that, I appreciate everybody being on the line with us. Like I said, we're going to have an actual networking lunch and learn next week. But if you don't want to show up, you can still be on the webinar. Our conference room has a really cool webinar kind of thing where you can, people can be in there and on the webinar. So other than that, does anybody have any questions before we tie it up? Anybody?
I have a lot of questions. I'm going to book a consultation.
Okay, let's book a consultation, Wendy. That's not a problem at all. Anybody else have just one last question to wrap this up, or are we good? We're all good? All right. Hey, it was so much enjoyable to talk to you guys. I love doing